So we're going to do this video much like we did the Argentine Tegu care video. The structure is going to be pretty much the same, maybe with a couple of differences here and there. To start off, we're going to talk about housing. Now, just like my Tegu enclosure, this enclosure is a 4 foot by 2 foot by 2 foot, 4 feet long, that way, by 2 feet high, by 2 feet deep. Alright, now for baby bearded dragons or bearded dragons under about 10 or 12 inches, it's recommended that you keep them in a glass aquarium or terrarium of about 20 gallons, maybe 40 gallons. And these kind of tanks will last them for a short while. You'll have to upgrade pretty soon, but the disadvantage is that if you were to put a baby bearded dragon in here, it would be hard for the bearded dragon to find its food, for one, and also it wouldn't be able to thermoregulate as well. So the heat distribution is going to be different in a big enclosure than it would in a small enclosure. It would be easier for the bearded dragon to heat up properly in a 20 gallon or a 40 gallon versus this size tank. And of course, when you have your cage, tank, enclosure, terrarium, whatever you decide to use, you want to make sure you have something that closes the enclosure. You want to have a top if you have a glass aquarium so that the lizard can't get out, or so that maybe some of your other pets can't get in. Now, as far as what you put inside the enclosure, it's up to your personal preference, but there are some basics that you want to have. You want to have a basking area. So as you see here, I have one log, and then there's another large log which makes for several basking spots. And Cora is using one of the basking spots now. This is the hottest basking spot here. This is normally where Toothless is. Even down here though, they can both still get some heat and radiation from the bulb that I use, which I'll talk about a little bit later. And on the left side of the enclosure, they can cool down and they can still be on a branch and maybe still get a little bit of heat here and here, but not nearly as much as they're going to get here. And if you look further down the enclosure, you see a food bowl and a water bowl. Now the water bowls are arguable for these lizards since they do come from Australia, and they also have trouble recognizing standing water, which means that if I pour water in the bowl and I don't make it move, they may not see it or drink it. So some people keep bearded dragons without ever using water bowls. They just spray them. If you choose to spray them, you could spray them 2 times a day and make sure they drink. See if I can get one of them to drink. Cora's drinking a little bit. Toothless normally drinks better than Cora does. You don't want to have any kind of fake plants in the enclosure because they will see it as green and try to eat it. You don't want them to have to eat something that maybe they can't digest. You want to have something they can climb on. You may want to have a hide spot or a log. They can both get inside here and hide somewhat. Also, they like to burrow from time to time, so you could add a burrow box. I don't have one, but I would be glad to show you what one looks like. Pretty much you just you can take a box and cut holes out of it and put something that they can burrow in, maybe play sand, so that it would stay inside the box and it wouldn't get in the rest of your enclosure, and they would never have to eat inside of that box, so you don't have to worry about risks of impaction. Now on to substrate. Personally, I've always used non-particulate substrate. That means I've always used substrate that could not be ingested by my bearded dragons, just because of the risk of impaction. Toothless was kept on newspaper, repti carpet, and I believe after that she was kept on tile. That's just my personal preference. Now, if you want a more naturalistic look, you can go with play sand, which I hear is the best sand to use. I've read and heard not to use calci sand because sometimes the reptiles can sense the calcium or taste the calcium and they'll eat more of the sand because of that. Also, I heard that it clumps in the stomach. Some of these are myths, some of them are not, so you might want to do your own research and check out more information to make your own decisions. But there are definitely some substrates you want to stay away from, especially for baby bearded dragons. Okay, because sometimes it's just too easy for them to get a mouthful of sand when they're trying to go for their food, or a mouthful of substrate when they're trying to go for their food. My opinion is just play it safe and use newspaper or paper towels because it's a lot easier to clean and it's a lot cheaper. So if you do want to go the naturalistic route, wait till they get maybe 12 to 15 inches and then put them on something like play sand. As far as the reptile carpet, there's a couple of different types. There's a grassy type, and there's a type that has really small micro threads inside of them. And those I don't really prefer because sometimes the bearded dragon's nails can get caught inside those little threads. Also, from what I've read, you never want to use crushed walnut shells because it's pretty much 0% digestible if it gets ingested. So that's just the risk you don't really want to take. Now to talk about heating and lighting. I'm not going to really talk about humidity too much because, again, these are desert lizards and they don't really require much humidity. As far as the heating, you have a couple of options, one of which is under tank heaters, but most people don't really go these routes with the bearded dragons because bearded dragons seem to prefer heat from above. The most commonly taken route is the use of light bulbs. There's a variety you can go with, which I'll get into when I talk more about lighting. Again, from what I've read and researched over the years, you want your basking spot to be about 110 degrees Fahrenheit for juveniles. For young bearded dragons to juveniles, and for adults, you want it to be about 95 to 100. This spot is about 105 degrees, and the rest of the tank down here is about 85 to 90. At night, the temperatures can fall as low as 65 degrees, and if you live in a place where it gets really cold at night, you can use ceramic heat emitters. They look like light bulbs, but they give off no light. They just give off heat. You could also use under tank heaters or red light bulbs, which are not supposed to be visible to reptiles, so it wouldn't interrupt their nighttime patterns. With these lizards, you want to provide full spectrum lighting, about 12 hours of it a day. So you want to have a 12 on, 12 off cycle, meaning there's 12 hours of light and 12 hours of nighttime. Some people do 10 hours a day, some people do 8 hours a day, but I believe what's recommended is from about 8 to 12 hours a day of light. And again, full spectrum lighting means UVA plus UVB. Now UVA, just to be pretty basic, is responsible for stimulating appetite and natural activity and behavior. UVB is responsible for helping these dragons synthesize vitamin D3, which aids in the absorption of calcium. So if you don't have UVB for these reptiles, you will see metabolic bone disease. So again, without full spectrum lighting, your lizards will not grow properly and they will not be able to absorb and synthesize calcium properly. UVB is achieved in a few different ways. Some people have outdoor enclosures year-round where their bearded dragons can have access to the sun, which is the best source of UV everything. You have to have them in an enclosure. You can use a mercury vapor bulb, which is being used here, or you could use a fluorescent strip. The most commonly used ones, I believe, with bearded dragons are the Reptisun lights. So they're sold as Reptisun 5.0 and 10.0. Now 5.0 I believe is 5% UVB, 10.0 is 10% UVB, meaning that the 10.0 has a higher output of UVB. Now these lights, the fluorescent lights, I believe have to be changed every 6 months. The mercury vapor bulbs have a life of about 8 to 10 months. Some people even say a year. You can change them out every year. I'm not sure about that, so I change mine about every 9 to 10 months just to be safe. But again, with the mercury vapor bulbs, such as the Power Sun, the distance from the light is far greater than the fluorescent strip. So I believe this has a range of about 5 feet. That means anything under the light is radiating these bearded dragons sufficiently. Fluorescent strip, the lizards need to be able to get within 6 to 10 inches of that bulb. So you see some people with the fluorescent strips on the top part of the tank there, and there's no kind of ornament or fixture where the bearded dragon can get close enough to it to where they can actually utilize those UVB rays. So if you have a fluorescent strip, you need to let your bearded dragon get close enough to actually be able to absorb those rays. As far as feeding, if you're a person who is squeamish when it comes to bugs, maybe a bearded dragon might not be the best lizard for you because sooner or later you're going to have to handle bugs. Worms, roaches, crickets. Some people feed them locusts, grasshoppers. This is just my little mini feeder tub of superworms that I have right now. And yes, if you keep them inside and you don't keep them properly, they will start to stink. Bearded dragons are omnivores, meaning they eat both plant and animal matter. When they're younger, they require more animal matter to grow. The percentage, I think it's about 80% animal matter to 20% vegetable matter or plant matter. And as they get older and become adults, that ratio switches to about 70 to 80% plant matter. And then you have 30 to 20% animal matter. And I believe it varies for every different bearded dragon. It's not concrete for every lizard. Food options as far as bugs and insects or animals range from crickets, mealworms, waxworms, superworms, hornworms. Some people feed them pinky mice, fuzzy mice. I wouldn't recommend feeding the mice that often because I don't think they're the type of lizard that has the stomach acids to digest fur very frequently. But I have seen them eat pinky mice with no problems. And the insects, you want to gut load. This means you want to feed them food that is healthy and nutritious, which will benefit your lizard as well. So I have a couple of celery sticks in there, there's carrots for moisture, and I just throw the green stems inside because they'll eat those as well, so that when the lizards eat these, they're also eating the vegetables that the insects eat. We don't want to feed them fruit every day. I would feed them fruit sparingly. But vegetables, you want to stick to the dark leafy greens. So you want to feed them mustard greens, collard greens, turnip greens, kale. You can even feed them lettuce, but you want to make sure the lettuce is dark leafy lettuce. You don't want to feed them iceberg lettuce. And again, you can feed them most any kind of vegetable. You can feed them a lot of fruits as well, but you do want to stay away from avocados. Make sure you take the stems off. All right, now I've removed all the major stems out of the greens. Some people say young bearded dragons won't eat greens, but Toothless has been eating greens since she's been with me, and she was about maybe a few weeks, maybe a month old when I got her. So offer greens as early as you can and see if you can get them eating them, because it's healthy and they require it. You want to use some kind of supplement. This is just a vitamin that contains D3, so there probably is calcium remnants in it, but I have mixed calcium into this container, so this is calcium as well as vitamins. Maybe sprinkle a bit much there. And when Toothless was a baby or juvenile, I was dusting the food every day. Now I'll do it every 2 to 3 feedings, and I'll skip the next 2. It just depends. It really depends. You don't want to skip too many feedings without calcium if you're not feeding a food that already has a lot of calcium in it. Bearded dragons get a lot of water from their greens as well, so you can spray the greens, which is what I normally do, and this also helps get their humidity level of about 35 to maybe 50%, which is what they require. You don't want it too much higher than that. And I normally let them eat until they're done eating. Sometimes you might need to move the greens to stimulate their feeding responses. This Toothless looking for a worm right there. I don't think she's gonna eat that whole thing. Could be wrong though. And she ate the whole thing. Well, surprise me. Go ahead, I'm sorry. Get it. For now, that is going to be it for my bearded dragon care sheet. I was trying to keep it pretty short. And again, this is not an entirely inclusive care sheet. You know, if you're planning on getting a bearded dragon, don't just use this as your only resource. I'm going to have more resources at the bottom that you should go check out. Never stop reading, never stop learning about it. And there's always more stuff to learn. So, thanks for watching, and have a good day.